Hello, everybody.
Hi there.
Thanks
How are
for
you doing,
joining our
everybody?
webinar.
Thanks for joining us today. If you are here with us, if you wouldn't mind just dropping in the chat what organization you're from, that would be awesome. And we'll go ahead and get started. So today we have a special webinar. It is a case study on Pitkin County, Colorado. My name is Adriana. I am the account manager here at Graphical Networks, and we also have Jason Sherman. He is our head of customer support joining us, who will be taking over the Q&A and the interview with Kyle. We also have Tim. Tim Kim is our sales executive as well, so you'll probably be hearing from him later on. Yeah, and we can go over the agenda as well. Awesome. So we'll do a quick overview of netTerrain, who we are, what is netTerrain, and then we'll jump into the interview with Kyle Nelson and his team, and we'll see a little bit about his project and kind of get into that. Jason will ask some questions, and we will also answer some of your questions. Hopefully you all have some questions. Thanks for joining us, Sean. And if you wouldn't mind answering or throwing your questions in the chat, and we'll get to those later on throughout the presentation.
Yeah, or the Q&A section, you can throw them in there.
Yes, either or works.
So one of those places we'll find them, but preferably Q&A, so it's easier for me to identify a question.
Hi,
so
Wayne.
as was mentioned, I am Jason Sherman, Graphical Networks. I do pre and post sales stuff, show people netTerrain, how to use netTerrain, talk about, answering technical questions, things like that. And then post sales from the standpoint of helping implementation, support, and that type of thing. So I've been here a long time. But as was mentioned, the core of this is going to be really talking with Kyle about his project in Pitkin County. So I appreciate that. So to get started, what is netTerrain? Well, if you're not familiar with netTerrain, we're really software built for doing IT documentation. That can be anything from inside plant, rack and stack, to outside plant, fiber cables, strands, splicing, etc., and just doing logical network diagrams. We do integrations with other systems, ServiceNow, SolarWinds, those types of things, discovery, and some other things as well. But the core is really network documentation, right? Sort of purpose built for that. So our company has been around for a while, 15, 20 years now of doing IT documentation, and a lot of us were in the space even before Graphical Networks of doing documentation. So we try and make it and keep it user-friendly software. It's very visual, so you can kind of build as-built environments. We're used by many organizations, large and small. So there's really no threshold. You don't have to be a certain size, right? You don't have to be under a certain size or as big as a certain size. It's really open to anybody that's got a network they want to document. So with that said, co-presenter today is Kyle. Before I get to Kyle, just real brief and quick, because the focus is really going to be Kyle, but I am going to mention just a little bit about Graphical Networks as far as the netTerrain software. I mentioned some of the things you can do, rack and stack, rack elevation type drawings, something like this, being able to generate path diagrams, physical connections, how do I connect from this port to the next port to the next port? What is that path? What does that look like, right? Things like if you have a campus, you're documenting fiber cables, you want to see how those fiber cables are connected, endpoint connections, and so on. That's also something we do where you can get into splice cases and showing the splicing and the splice tray strands and how they're spliced together. So pretty common for us. Being able to create circuits and define those circuits, being able to see, the path along conduit. What are the cables? What are the strands that make up that circuit and things like that? So that's really what we do, as I was discussing, and we'll see some of that from Kyle as well. He's got some screenshots to share of his projects. So back over to Kyle. I'll let you introduce yourself, and you're on mute, just so you know, Kyle, but I'll let you kick off and tell us a little about yourself.
Well, thanks, Jason, and everyone for the invitation to present. Again, my name is Kyle Nelson, coming to you live and direct from Aspen, Colorado, where we're based here on the western slope of Colorado in the beautiful Rocky Mountains. We're super excited to share a little bit about our use case, how we're using netTerrain here. We've been customers for just about 2 years now, really happy with the product. And we'll kind of dive into our use case here in just a little bit. But for me, just to give you a quick overview, I'm one of our telecommunications project engineers, and I primarily focus on not just our implementation of our broadband and network systems, but also our public safety 911 radio systems as well.
Great. So obviously covering a lot of territory and information and different systems in your department. So speaking of which, outside of some of the ones you mentioned as far as your department, other things that you guys support sort of day in and day out, and I guess some of those departments that you handle, is it just fiber? I'll let you kind of describe some of that.
Absolutely. So our department officially, right, is the telecommunications department here in Pitkin County. And we've evolved over the years. We sort of we're born out of the translator department, right? And that's not language translation, but that's rebroadcast of television and FM radio throughout the county. And that's what primarily still supports us in our primary mission to this day. But that's just one of the 3 buckets, if you will, of the systems that we support throughout Pitkin County. We also support all the public safety radio programming, training, and maintenance, including our 911 dispatch center, so the primary center, and 2 satellite centers. And then we also, sort of our 3rd bucket, if you will, is broadband. And that's all encompassing on wireless as well as underground or fixed wireless, fixed broadband, and largely focusing on the middle mile, right? Building out that backbone and then inviting in some of our local internet service providers to get that fiber to the whatever it may be. And sort of those are the 3 buckets really that we support. And so sort of how we do that all, right, is amazingly, right, with a team of 6. And I've got 2 great folks with me here in the room today, Drew Peterson and Dan Bunomi. So they're in there in the chat. If you've got questions about our specific use case, what we do, please feel free to drop those questions in. They're going to help me respond to that. But sort of talking through things now, what we do more every day is truly our team and the infrastructure that we support. We have a zero-fail mission, right? We are the installers, maintainers, the experts on public and non-public safety communications infrastructure that first responders, government agencies, residents, and visitors rely on to conduct business functions and communicate in times of crisis. We also provide expert consultation for infrastructure projects countywide that require any degree, which is most of them now, some type of degree of connectivity. And most recently, we're actually supporting a multi-site traffic counter system and some solar installations as well. So very, very broad in what our team addresses. And for us, sort of to give you a scope and scale of the infrastructure that we manage across Pitkin County, we manage 13 mountaintop communication sites. And that's everything at those sites as well. The towers, the shelters, power systems, and the equipment within them. And those range from elevation in 6,500 feet to over 12,000 feet in elevation, over the 1,000 square miles that our county encompasses, about 40% of which has no radio coverage. That's public safety radio, and about 55% roughly has no cell phone coverage. So we're operating very rural, remote areas. So connectivity and building out that connectivity is a huge, huge priority for us. So on site, we do the tower climbing, we hang equipment on the tower, all the cabling, as well as the supporting infrastructure, electrical, mechanical, HVAC, the backup generators. Right. I mentioned our countywide TV and FM rebroadcast system. We actually have one of the largest systems in the country, actually, just with the number of transmitters that we have to cover all the weird little drainages and things that our valley has. And we also, more importantly, to keep those sites connected, we've installed and now maintain 34 microwave hops. And those primarily connect our tower sites, government buildings, public safety infrastructure, and some of those remote fire stations through a fully redundant carrier grade network. And so that last piece of it is 1,800 plus radios for public and non-public safety agencies countywide. So again, circling back, that's all done with a team of 6 in all seasons and weather conditions. So it can be really challenging at times, but also a lot of fun, because that's everything from snowmobiles to snowcats, tracked UTVs, trucks, helicopters, even to get to some of these sites. We maintain that infrastructure, the systems to support all of our partners, and ultimately meeting that challenge of our zero fail mission.
So you guys are really there to drive interesting equipment. That's really the reason you guys are working there.
It's a fringe benefit.
I like that you make it fun, though. That's good.
Yeah, for sure. I think that would be sometimes enjoyable, but I don't know, the dead of the winter and having to go fix stuff at 12,000 feet could be a little tricky. So clearly there's a lot of key and critical infrastructure here, and the fact that you're trying to make it really zero fail. That's quite a task, I would imagine, for all you guys in the department. So yeah, that's quite impressive and quite amazing. So I'm guessing that before you were doing documentation, forget even using our product, what was it like sort of beforehand when you guys were doing things? Did you have a tool before? What was it like with the tools that you had? And then of course we're going to talk about why you moved on, but I'll let you speak to that a little bit.
Definitely. So sort of getting back to some of the origins of our department, when we started putting infrastructure in on the mountaintop sites, again, primarily with the TV and FM rebroadcast as our network began, it was largely graph paper and pencil, We evolved, if you will, into spreadsheets in the early 2000s when the advent of that came about. But nowadays, prior to netTerrain, we primarily used Google Sheets, and we're just Google-based here in Pitkin County, so that's the primary product that we use. And we use that in a tracking spreadsheet along with supporting pictures and documentation for each of our sites in Google Drive. And right now, as we started to build out our fiber network, and we were working with some other partners in our valley, both government and private entities, one of the things we started running into was there was so much institutional knowledge of fiber that had been installed as part of large infrastructure projects that was put in the ground as entities built out their own networks. And as people left those agencies and those entities, that knowledge was lost and it was not formally documented. And so sometimes we would find places and we'd say, oh, well, here's fiber. Whose is it? Where does it go to? And it became a real challenge to track that information down. And we wanted to get ahead of that. We wanted to be proactive here for Pitkin County as a whole, so that we leave a positive legacy, so that we don't repeat some of these mistakes of our past. And netTerrain is one of the many tools that we evaluated and ultimately settled on here for being able to document our fiber infrastructure. And because there's nothing worse than, say, for example, an emergency that there's a fiber cut and now everyone's pointing the finger at each other and asking, well, whose is it and who's responsible, One of the other things that we ran into is we needed a way to document, as we partnered with our internet service providers as well as local governments to connect buildings and other entities. We wanted to be able to tell them and know which strands were dark and were available to be connected to, and so that we can manage who's utilizing how much of that fiber infrastructure that we've worked so hard to put in the ground, and also to really have a platform that allows for the sharing of those network diagrams, that information very easily for us with our partners, but also something that allowed for not just the outside plant, the infrastructure underground and overhead, but also within each of our tower sites and our communication sites as well, documenting the inside plant piece. And so netTerrain was the platform that allows us to do all of that in one package.
Got you. So you mentioned things, troubleshooting, identifying dark, unused fiber, sharing documentation with partners. It seems like that would probably make things a lot more efficient when you do have these issues and problems, and also being able to converse with other folks. So that's great, and that's great to hear. So you guys obviously are using netTerrain today. When you started looking at netTerrain, Did you look at other solutions? And I don't want to get into like names and things like that. It's just more criteria. You know, when you looked at things, was there anything particular you were looking for? Things that you liked, or you know, features we might have had that somebody else didn't. And again, not to get into too fine a detail, but just more kind of that process you guys went through when you were looking. Because when people are looking at solutions, I mean, we always tell them, and most people are, they're going to look at other solutions anyway. You kind of always look at 2 or 3 or 4 and build some criteria and then make a decision. And that's pretty common. So I'd like to hear from you kind of what you guys went through.
Absolutely. It was actually very serendipitous, in fact, where one of my first projects when I joined our team here in Pitkin County, formerly a 911 dispatcher, now under the realm and the auspices of the telecommunications house of things. One of the first projects that I had was finding and selecting a fiber mapping tool. And we did develop as a team here some evaluation criteria so that it was an objective decision and we could really focus on the features that we were looking for, as opposed to just the look and feel and the price point. And yes, we worked those in some way, shape, and form, but we wanted to be able to make a sound decision and recommendation, since this was a platform that we were going to be using going forward into the future for a ways as well. And in our exploring some other solutions, we ran into some very challenging experiences with some of the other vendors, where it felt almost like a used car salesperson approach, all the way to, well, yes, we can do the inside plant stuff, but that's going to be all these additional costs, and some of the cost models just didn't match up with how we were planning to use the tool. So why we really settled on netTerrain in the end was it was a very fair annual cost for our desired use case and the size of our system, right? And as things are built out, right, and sort of geared towards the number of objects in our instance or within our use of netTerrain, as opposed to, say, the population of our county, like some other vendors base it on, right? We thought that it was a much more fair approach from netTerrain. We also loved at the outset the extensive training support and documentation. From the YouTube video library to the documentation and the manuals that are available for the platform and that are updated with each refresh of the software. It's been very, very helpful, very easy to find and get at the answers we're looking for. And if there's something that we needed, be able to reach out to a real person and get a prompt response. And most importantly for us, right, you heard about our use case and what we support, right? There's a huge object library that's already in netTerrain, largely focused on infrastructure and networking, but we have so many unique devices that we also wanted to map and rack and capture that I sent a list and some documentation of, I think it was about 50 different objects, I remember, to the team. And in very short order, those objects were built and available in our instance to use. And even the power and the Ethernet ports and fiber ports were mapped and ready to go in each one. So it was literally plug and play, just in a virtual instance, to quickly document and quickly build out and scale up what we have in our instance. We focused on the inside plant mapping first, and now that we finally got our fiber in the ground here, we're able to start building out our outside plant side of things as well. And just the experience with the netTerrain team working with local government, like when we had questions and we had pitched our use case, they understood it from the beginning.
Well, that's good to hear. Thanks for that feedback, of course, for everybody and for ourselves. It's nice to hear that. Well, and we're glad the sales experience was pretty good and not too used car salesy on our part. We do have I will say I will take some pride in the training and support library, but also the documentation. We take that very seriously. You don't always see that anymore with software, like the manuals and things like that. It's like, here's a knowledge base, go do it. But we do try and keep up with our documentation and keep a really nice, keep things up to date as we do releases and things like that. And the object library, yeah, we do like to turn those around quickly for folks because we don't want to hold anybody up, right? When you need something, you want to work, we want to make sure you can go out and do that job. So that's great. So moving on, implementation and use. I'm going to check real quick, but I don't think we have any questions right now. Let me just go to the chat and just see if there's anything there.
Do.
No, nothing right now. If you guys have questions, Q&A, chat, throw them up there. We'll get to them. So I think we've heard about some of these things, which was sort of main goal and goals of implementing netTerrain. And was there something specific when you guys started this? Was it mainly rack elevation, or was it with the goal of doing the fiber and the fiber build out? What was that original sort of idea when you guys started, and where did you want to end up? And did you guys have a time frame? You know, did you guys sit down and go, this is going to be a project and this is where we want to be in 6 months or a year or whatever it happens to be?
For sure. For us, the primary goal of implementing netTerrain, we wanted an all-encompassing tool, right? Something that was able to document our inside plant down to the rack and port and strand level and how we connect things within our sites. And then also our outside plant, so connections between sites, between handholds and other physical infrastructure as our fiber network continued to grow, but also the ability to easily share that information with our other partners. And so for us, right, as that broadband funding, especially during COVID, as that became available, governments and private entities alike, right, they in earnest started installing fiber. And our conversations with our partners really revealed that there's a lot that's being done, a lot that's being installed, and we wanted to be able to capture that. And also, one of the things that we looked for in netTerrain was the ability to both import and export other mapping file type formats, so like KMZs or spreadsheets of points with some GPS data, and being able to very quickly not need to manually do that, but bring that in and then maybe just do some fine tuning. It really reduced the workload on us from the start. And so that was a huge piece. I remember that was one of our main evaluation criteria that we looked at. The other part of it is we kind of knew ahead of time that if we're going to install fiber underground, we're now responsible for not just maintaining it, but also responding to the 811 call outs for the utility locates. And that's something now that we use netTerrain for, is sort of a, hey, where do we start looking if we need a reminder, and then we go and verify it with our handheld equipment. But it also allows us where if anyone has questions of, hey, who has fiber or underground infrastructure in this area, we can provide that both in like verbal or graphical format as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think you mentioned that to me the other day about the 811, and so that's interesting to hear about as well. So other places, kind of other uses that it comes into play as well. So so that was kind of talking about the rollout. We'll talk about how your team uses netTerrain in a second, because you got some screenshots and stuff for us, so I'd like to get into those. And I think you talked about sort of tasks, and also the screenshots. We'll kind of talk about how you use it as well. And you already talked about, I think, support with netTerrain and some of the stuff that interactions you've had with us. So that's great. So let's talk about your project. You guys sent over some screenshots. I'd like to walk through some of these with you. And what we're seeing here, I'll let you kind of explain, and I'll talk about it a little bit too.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. So kind of to start with things, right, we initially started on inside plant mapping, or within structures. And this is sort of how we chose to go about laying this out, right? I'm not saying this is necessarily the best or most appropriate approach, but it's what made sense for us at the time that we were rolling this out right at scale across our many sites. And what we started with is and we sort of took a logical approach to our platform. And so what we sort of looked at was, within each site, say in this particular one, there's multiple rooms at this building. And so within each room, I drew some squares or some polygons, and then I placed racks within each of those to show where they are in reality. And then on the right-hand side of this shows one of those rack diagrams. In this case, some of our FM radio, or excuse me, this is one of our television racks, right? So we're able to capture within the names of each of those devices, for us at a glance, in a rack, knowing if we had to send one of our folks to the site or if we needed a mental refresher, where in the rack should we start looking based on the unit, or in this case, maybe the TV channel that we're having some trouble with. And those as well, being able to also document, you see at the top of the rack, we have our PDU or power distribution unit. And from there, we actually have documented down to which unit or which device connects to which port on that PDU, so that if we have to remotely power cycle one of those via these Ethernet capable PDUs, we're able to do that and quickly know what device, what port we should be looking for. Then additionally, also the connectivity on the Ethernet side as well, right? As the switch in that rack is able to then go and we're able to document how each of those connections are made. So this is sort of our clean. We try to keep this rack view fairly clean. So I took off and I unchecked the Ethernet connections layer on this particular one. But if you jump to the next slide really quick, Jason, this is, so on that next slide, that kind of shows our, in this case, the switch in that rack. You can see then just by a click of the mouse and by a quick look, I know what port connects to the Ethernet connection on each of those television receivers and transmitters at that site, as well as if we had to power cycle this whole switch, which port on that PDU in that rack it goes to. So from very, very quick, we can get at that information that we need to assist with troubleshooting and maintaining these devices.
No, that's great. I want to back up to this one because I had a couple of questions for it. One, it's interesting, one of the things you said, though, which was you guys built things out the way it made sense for you guys and your environment. Because I do get a lot of folks that are like, what's best practice and things like that, which is great. And, you know, we always will tell you what we think best practice and that kind of thing. But ultimately, the best practice is kind of setting things up the way that it's meant or understood by your group and organization. It doesn't have to be exactly the way we would say do it for sure. It's a pretty flexible tool, so you can do things kind of how it makes sense, like you said. Like you said, putting a polygon around this to represent basically a data center. Some people will actually create a room called data center and double click and drill down into it and have floor plans and all that stuff. But, you know, it adds layers and it adds other things to it that you may or may not need. So this is really good. I noticed too, you got your visual overrides going for your racks, so you can see right away which ones are, you know, more full than others as far as rack utilization. I was wondering, when you guys started doing this, how did you populate these racks? Did you just drag and drop and just build them out based on like a picture, or did you do Excel import, or what were you guys doing?
Oh, Jason, that's a great question. So what we've been doing is based on either when we're physically on site or more often than not, we've got about a 4-month construction/site visit window here where we can drive to our sites. So a lot of it is through the capture of photos just to document what is where. And we'll note, I'm still using our Google Sheet to document some of those port connections. And then we utilize that during our time in the winter where we're not visiting sites nearly as much as in the summertime. And we're able to from those photographs and also some of our Google Sheet data with some of those port connections and things, build out the connections and drag and drop the devices into the racks in our netTerrain instance. And as you said, yes, the color coding with the loading of the racks and the capacity, that at first glance, right, as we bring on more partners, not just in the broadband space, but more recently, we've assisted with the implementation of artificial intelligence powered wildfire detection cameras within our valley. And so one of the things they always ask is, well, hey, can we install these cameras at your site? And where can we put our small rack of equipment? And so it's very nice to be like, oh, I can look at this rack in real time, be confident saying, here's where you should install your devices.
Gotcha. That's great. And then on this one, and actually Sean, one of the folks out the chat, was mentioning or asking about the greens. Are you using an expression for that, visual override, or are you just changing the colors?
There's, at this point, not quite any visual override, no rhyme or reason to it. That's just the default that that we kind of started with.
Gotcha.
Like Ethernet connections were green, so the small lines between those larger port rectangles, right? That's just knowing that that's Cat 5, Cat 6 Ethernet cable, and then our power cable for 120 volt power is there in orange, just so that we know, because we also operate a 48 volt system for some of the devices at our sites that are battery backed up that we'll see in just a second. And so we can then know, is this grid power or is this backup power that's making this connection?
Gotcha. And the ports themselves, the green port, was that something you guys override with an expression, or do you recall?
No, not that we do.
Yeah.
Not that we did. No.
Yeah. No, I like it though, because you can see right away visually which ones have connections and which ones don't. So that's nice. So yeah, moving on.
Yeah, so let's dig in a little bit. This is, for example, one of our racks for our battery backup power at our sites, right? Zero fail mission, critical communications equipment. We got to keep those microwaves alive if the generator runs out of fuel or fails to start, right? Or until it starts, I should say. So at the top of that rack, we have one of our rectifiers, and in this particular rectifier, there's 8 open slots when it comes from the factory that we can load these rectifier modules into, that then take the incoming 120 volt power and then rectify that into 48 volts to maintain those batteries. And so what we can do is, and what we did is, one of the features of netTerrain, we can customize the fields, the default fields for each device. So for us, what we wanted to know, for example, for these individual rectifier modules that we drag and drop into that rectifier device is, what's its power rating on it, what should it be outputting? And then there were a couple other things that we could build out as well, but just at first glance, knowing what is the capacity of that rectifier to charge and maintain those batteries and the equipment on site. And then in the bottom, we have some battery racks that are there. And then within each of those, I can drag and drop different size batteries based on the identified capacity. And so for us, for battery replacement, one of the things we want to know is not just the data manufacturer, when did it get put into service, and then what is its capacity? And then in that custom comments field, you'll see that it says wired in series on a 48 volt shelf. And that's just that reminder to us or to anyone else that, yes, these are individual 12 volt batteries, but we've got those wired up to build our 48 volt system for power at each of these sites. And then we can, if we swap out or if we add additional batteries, we as we drag that new battery in there, we can put in those fields that appear by default so that we know what information we need to capture when we add these objects to our instance.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I hadn't seen the batteries, slotted and where you put those in like that. So that's pretty cool. Are you guys have a system? I noticed also you had dates in here, date and service, date and manufacturer, and that kind of stuff. Are you using those dates in any way in reports or anything right now? Or is that a future thing maybe?
So for us, the batteries have an estimated life of approximately 10 years until they start rapidly losing capacity. And so for us, we can query that, we can run reports on that and use those to plan for future upgrades and maintenance, capital upgrades to our sites so that we can ensure that our system keeps operating at peak capacity.
That's great. I'm going to switch to the next one and talk about the outside plant a little bit. I like this.
Totally. All right. So now outside plant, as I said, very, very early stages, as I believe less than a month ago, I think we finally finished pulling the fiber through the conduit that was put in the ground. And when you build and you try to install fiber in an old riverbed, as you can imagine, there's lots of challenges that become associated with that. And so for us, one of the things that we did as part of this project is we partnered with several, not just governments, but also local utilities, and we ran some some conduits in parallel that are very, very close to each other. And so we wanted to capture not just our infrastructure, but the partner infrastructure as well, and the placement of not just where those conduits are, but the handholds that they go through. And we haven't placed the fiber in them in our instance just yet. That's still coming, but in here, we can very quickly at a glance know that based on where we're standing on the earth, if we're next to a handhole or a series of handholes, whose infrastructure, whose fiber we'd be able to access with those, or as sometimes happens, if handholes and things get damaged, we can identify was it us or maybe our partner utility in this case that might need to look at servicing and replacing that particular piece of infrastructure. And so this is sort of how we chose to go about building it out, and we utilized a satellite image background just because for us, as we're going out and as we're sharing this, it's much easier to visualize, oh, that's where I am, that's where I'm standing, this is the handhole that I'm looking for.
Yeah, for sure. And we also have the Google Earth map you can use as well. I don't know if you guys have checked that out, but this is pretty interesting for sure. Do you guys are going to be doing splicing with your new fiber? Or is it more home run type runs as far as the strands and stuff?
There will be much splicing that occurs.
Okay.
We pulled some, I believe it was a 96 count. Or a 48 count, excuse me. So there's definitely room for growth. Some of those strands are already spoken for, but there's a lot of potential for growth with our government and as well as our internet service provider partners as we seek to partner with them, to get that last mile connectivity and those connections made. And part of that is having that capability and capacity to build those splice diagrams.
Got you. That's great. Moving down into the OSP some more, a little more detail here.
Yeah, and as you kind of highlighted at the beginning of the talk, those path diagrams, and this is sort of just a little snippet from ours, and for each of those paths, and you can look at the segments along those paths. So this is, for an example, from one of our main our Meet Me centers to one of the handholds that's right next to it. We can then start to add in, and again, we're still building this out, so bear with us. There's not much data, but
yeah.
But we can start to put in and add fields and make very rich data sets of what would we or a partner want to know about, let's say, a piece of conduit, for example.
Yeah, it's nice because you can put in things like the size of the conduit, in this case, like you have the 2-inch diameter, or if there's other information you want to bring in, like the owner, you can have drop-down lists and other things which allow you to really kind of define, those different pieces in the conduit. So, well, thank you guys really for those screenshots. Those were awesome. I love other folks being able to see that stuff. So any kind of ROI you can speak about? I mean, it doesn't have to be like specific costs, but just in terms of efficiencies, performance, and other things that you guys can think of with respect to using netTerrain that maybe you didn't have before.
Sure. So for us, at this point in our case, I don't have a specific example to share yet. Yeah. But thinking ahead, we will absolutely save time when it comes to investigating available strands for future connections between different points in our fiber network, troubleshooting, and also the link path tool. So knowing what strands connect what devices and what is the physical path they take through our network when it comes to troubleshooting those fiber connectivity issues, because it's with our mission and the devices and the entities that we're connecting, in outage, and sometimes can be very critical, and often is. And so the amount of time that we can save when it comes to a troubleshooting standpoint and being able to deploy our team effectively and knowing what to look for and where to look, that's going to be the real return on investment, which thankfully to this point, we haven't had any major issues.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we hear that a lot too. I mean, it's usually things troubleshooting for sure, because if you know where things are and how they're connected, it's a lot easier to figure out when you have a problem or where a problem might reside. And to your point, with respect to the algorithm, the sort of being able to determine a path based on fiber using the information that's in the system. Yeah, it's a nice tool that we have, I think, in the tool. So it's a nice feature of the tool. So that's great. Looking ahead with respect to netTerrain. I mean, some of these questions, like, I guess looking back, what would it be like not to have netTerrain if they sort of had to take it away from you, and was investing in netTerrain worth it?
Well, for us, with some of the other tools that we're exploring, and I know that some of our other partners in our valley are using, a lot of it, some of the other options, they also required a high degree of technical expertise and training with other very formal geographic information system tools that are very popular on the market, but that quite often, even for me, coming out of college with a GIS minor, that I would still have to spend a significant amount of time relearning these very advanced tools, as opposed to being able to really jump right in very quickly. And for example, Dan, actually, our newest employee, he came on a little more than a year ago. And one of the things very initially that we trained him up on netTerrain, and the learning curve was not nearly as steep as we anticipated, where for other tools and platforms, I think it may have been a very different story where we only had a very small portion of our crew who was capable of using the tool, as opposed to it being very intuitive. And again, thinking forward, right, we want to set not just ourselves for success now, but also into the future. And so for us, the investment was worth it, because not only did netTerrain, right, it met that criteria, but it's meeting our needs. And as we were continuing to ask more of the platform and the support staff, that need and those growths, or that growth, is being met and supported. And so for us, now and into the future, for both operations and long-term archival, it's proven itself.
Wow, that's great. That's great feedback. Yeah, we try and keep the tool, and have always thought of the tool as being somewhat intuitive and hopefully somewhat easy to use. I mean, outside plant gets a little more difficult when you get into strands and things like that. So we fully recognize that, but hopefully, and it was an interesting point too, with respect to you guys thinking in terms of the future, right? Planning for the future, not just today, not just buying a tool for today, but a tool that can grow with you as you grow and add more things, like you were doing inside plant first, and now you can do your outside plant. So that's great. So yeah, certainly thanks for that. Questions? I didn't see a whole lot of questions out there, so I assume we probably addressed most of them during this, which is great. If it's, I think the next thing would be, I'm going to mention folks that are out there in the big universe. Feel free to get in touch with us. Tim's name is on the presentation here. You can reach out to him. His number is there, his email address, or of course you can just remember sales@graphicalnetworks.com, and we're happy to have a discussion and do demos and all that stuff. I'd like to say thank you to you, Kyle, and your team for coming out and doing this. This is fantastic. It's a great way for folks to learn about our tool, not just from us saying here, this is what you can do with the tool, but somebody that actually uses the tool day in and day out, which is great. And then they can determine if it's the right fit for them, because we're not always the right fit for everybody. I wish we were, but hey, that's why that's life, right? So not a bad thing. You can do a trial of netTerrain if you need to, for the folks out there. netterrain.us, you can go and sign up. We would encourage you to reach out to us, of course, if you have questions or you just need help getting started. We're happy to kind of walk you through those things. So with that said, I will stop my share. Again, thank you guys very much, Kyle and team. We really appreciate that, and all the work and the effort you guys put into this, which is really great. So
absolutely. And Jason, thanks so much for the opportunity again to share, and thanks to all of you who are attending live and those of you who are viewing this after the fact. And I just want to address Victor's question that he dropped there in the chat. Victor asked about the screenshot of our power distribution units and the battery information that was displayed. For example, the battery information, those battery shelves were kind of a custom object that was created along with the batteries themselves. And within the platform, our team actually went in and once those objects were imported, they come with some default data fields, but we went in and modified the default data fields for those objects to capture the information that we wanted to. And what's nice is that, right, when that change is made, that's reflected across both the current and any future objects that are added of that same type, so that we can make sure to capture that. So as we think, oh, we might want to capture, something else, something different about the batteries or whatnot, we can add that in future. And so that's the customization piece of netTerrain that we really appreciate. And with our power distribution units there as well, right? Those were custom built based on the model, and from what I found in my experience is that as long as I can provide the netTerrain team, their support team, some documentation, so not just an image of, say, the front and the back of a piece of hardware, but also what the different ports are, then they can quickly build that out. And one of the things I didn't show, but the other things you can do on, like, saying, like, putting, a card or like a battery into like another object. Think of like a router that has interchangeable cards on it. Like, we operate a Nokia network, and within our routers, we have anywhere from 6 to 8 cards that they can accommodate. And so as we get new cards, netTerrain helps us build those out as those ports are defined. And so whether they're Ethernet, they're a fiber port, or some other type of connection, right? Those cards can be customized, drag and drop into that router that's racked, just like you would pull and reinsert a card in real life. So lots of customization and capability to really get at how you want to capture your data and how you want it documented and how you want it displayed. So there really is no one size fits all, and we've been able to adapt netTerrain to our needs.
Yeah, thanks again for that information. We do try and keep it somewhat of a flexible tool and let people kind of do what they want in the tool, so to speak. So you're not relying on us necessarily or waiting for a device, that you don't have in your catalog. Certainly you can request things from us and we turn them around pretty quick, but you can also do those yourself. And like you said, the custom fields, adding additional data fields and that kind of thing. I think it's all pretty easy to do. So again, thanks for that feedback. So with that said, go ahead.
Yeah, just one last thing, Jason. If folks are kind of curious about a little bit about what we do, or kind of how our team operates, or just if you want to see some very beautiful photos from our field work, you can check out our websites. That's telecoms, so TELECOMS.pitkincounty.com, and that there's also a contact us page on there that you can reach out to our team if you have any questions about our use case of netTerrain or about any of the really fun and cool work that we do out here in Colorado. So again, telecoms.pitkincounty.com. We're happy to answer any questions going forward as well. Otherwise, again, feel free to reach out to Jason and the team there at netTerrain for any of the platform-specific questions.
Hey, thanks again. Thanks for that site. I see a helicopter there. I think I'm going to have to come visit you so we can go out with that helicopter. So that's awesome. And yeah, thanks for making that offer to everybody here as well. Because I always get folks, they're looking to talk to other people first, especially before purchase. It's always nice to talk to somebody using the tool.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, thanks again for that. So with
Thank
that
you
said,
for sharing your project. We appreciate it.
I think we'll close this webinar out. Thank you everybody for attending. Again, thanks Kyle and team, and looking forward to the next one. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thanks everybody. Bye.